120 days. That's how long these people have left before the line that not all of them will wake up passed. 25,000 years ago. This is the edge of the world, and I mean that literally, because everything north of here is just ice. Ice as tall as a mountain, stretching past the horizon and grinding slowly forward. In front of it, bare, frozen steppe, a wind that never stops, and a cold deeper than anything you've felt in your life. And in the middle of it, a few fires and a handful of people. They have no metal, no bread, no supply that won't run out, no doctor, no heated home, no promise of seeing spring. All they have is what they take with their own hands and what they know. And winter is closing in. Not just any winter, the harshest winter of the coldest century in 100,000 years. The herds are drifting south. Daylight is shrinking to a few short hours. Every scrap of food is already being counted. By one of the fires stands a man. Dark hair tied back, frost in his beard, a scar through one eyebrow. He looks up at the sky and understands something we're only beginning to grasp. The clock has already started. Drop by drop, day by day. How do you survive somewhere that the natural world is doing everything in its power to erase you? With no walls to hold the heat, no shelf of food, no guarantee you'll be alive tomorrow. Why didn't these people just go south, where it was warmer and easier? What kept them here, at the very edge of the ice, where every single day had to be won all over again? Here's the question that touches you more than you'd think. Out of everything they invented here, for one purpose only, to live to see spring, how much are you still carrying inside you right now? In your body, in your habits, in the way you share food with the people you love. We're going to walk this whole countdown together, from the first breath of cold to the night that becomes the line. We'll watch this small group live, hunt, freeze, and hold together. And when we reach the edge, we'll come back to the beginning, to the spring it all started from, to understand what it actually cost for a human being to become what we are. Meet that world. This was home 25,000 years ago, and winter is just beginning. Before we go any further, let's agree on where we're standing, because this is not the Earth you know. Same planet, same sky overhead, but the world beneath it is different in almost every way. 25,000 years ago, the planet was living through its coldest stretch in a very long time. Scientists call it the Last Glacial Maximum, the peak of the great ice, the lowest point of the cold. Picture what that means. Across northern Europe and North America lay sheets of ice kilometers thick. Not drifts of snow, not frozen lakes, but mountains of ice, heavier than whole mountain ranges. So heavy, the land itself sagged beneath them. Where the cities of Scandinavia and Canada stand today, there was nothing but a white, silent mass. That ice took the water for itself. So much water was locked up on land that the oceans ran short. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters. Try to picture what that does to the map of the world. Where the sea laps today, there was dry land. Coastlines pulled far back. Islands joined up with continents. between lands that open water now keeps apart, you could simply walk. The world was wider, and at the same time colder, drier, harsher. Our man by the fire doesn't live on the ice itself. Nothing lives on the ice. He lives in front of it, on the strip of land that ran the whole length of the glacier's edge. That land is worth a good look, because it's like nothing alive today. Imagine a steppe, but not a warm steppe of tall grass. A cold, dry, wind-scoured plain with not a single tree, running for thousands of kilometers, from Western Europe across the whole north of Asia. The ground is hard and frozen, the grass is low and tough, but there's a lot of it. Scientists call this world the Mammoth steppe. That name is no accident, because where there's grass enough, there's something to eat it. What ate it were giants. Across this steppe walked woolly mammoths covered in long brown hair as tall as a small house. Beside them, woolly rhinos, herds of wild horses, herds of reindeer, bison, musk oxen. This was a world of big animals, bigger and hardier than almost anything living now. Where herds like that graze, the ones who hunt them are never far. Cave lions, packs of wolves, quick little Arctic foxes. And among all those hunters, him, the human being. It's worth stopping here to say something clearly, because it matters. This man by the fire is not some half-animal from a cave, not a lesser human out of a 100-year-old textbook. He is Homo sapiens, the same human being as you. The same brain, the same body, the same capacity to think, to speak, to count, to love, to fear, and to plan. If you took his child, brought it into our time, and raised it in a modern city, it would be no different from your own classmates. There is no gulf between you and him. There is only time, and the knowledge piled up over these 25,000 years. He wasn't always the only one of his kind here. Not long ago, by the scale of evolution, Neanderthals walked across Europe, another branch of humanity, stockier and stronger, beautifully built for the cold. By the time of our story, they're already gone. They vanished roughly 15,000 years before this winter, and exactly why is still one of the great unanswered questions. What remained was us, a single kind of human on the entire planet. Now it falls to us to survive this ice. These people are few, very few. Don't picture villages and crowds. This whole vast, cold land is thinly settled. Small, mobile bands of a few dozen people scattered enormous distances apart. You could walk for many days and meet not one other living soul. Each of those bands is almost your entire world. Your family, your neighbors, your teachers, and your protection. All of it in a few dozen faces around a shared fire. To lose your people was almost certain death. Alone in this steppe, no one survived. Now, the heart of this chapter. Why do I keep saying 120 days? What is this line exactly? The cold beside the glacier didn't hold steady. The year split into a season when surviving was hard and a season when surviving was nearly impossible. That second one, the harshest stretch of winter, when a fixed deep freeze locks everything down, when snow buries the grass, when the herds pull away and only a few hours of light are left in the day, ran for about 4 months, around 120 days. This isn't some calendar that anyone back then counted out. No one was tallying days. It's the window inside which nature tests you every single day and forgives no serious mistake. That's what we're counting down. Not winter in general, but this corridor, the one you have to come out of alive. Our man is standing at the very start of it, 120 days ahead of him. He's already made the biggest bet of the year. He's chosen where his people will winter, and he knows how much they manage to set aside. That choice is almost impossible to fix now. One thing is left: to hold on. You'd think the first thing on his mind would be food, but no. In this world, there's a killer faster than any hunger. Hunger works over weeks. This threat will kill a person in a single night. And it doesn't care whether the stomach is full or empty. It's the one our man fights first. And it's the one that decides whether he even lives to the day when hunger becomes a problem at all. Here's the simple, brutal truth of that world. Cold kills faster than hunger. Without food, a person holds on a long time, weeks if they have to. The body knows how to ration, how to burn its own reserves, how to cling to life to the very last. But in a real freeze, with no protection, a person doesn't have weeks, they have hours. Heat leaks out of the body without stopping. And when more leaks out than the body can make, a person goes cold from the inside. Their thoughts tangle, they fall asleep, and don't wake up. Full stomach or empty, it makes no difference. So the first daily war beside the glacier isn't a war for food, it's a war for warmth. Our man fights it every day on 3 fronts at once. The first front is what's on the body: clothing. Forget the picture of the caveman draped in one crooked hide. You can't survive that way. And the people of that age understood it perfectly. They dressed smart, in layers. The inner layer, fur against the skin, to hold a thin film of warmed air close to the body. The outer layer, fur facing out, to throw off wind and snow. Between those layers sits air, and it's still air that warms you best of all. It's the exact same principle your winter coat is built on right now. In all the time since, humanity hasn't really invented anything better, only the materials have changed. For clothing to hold heat, it has to fit close. A hide thrown on crooked lets the wind in with every move. What you need is a suit cut to the body, sewn. You can only sew with something made to sew. Here, archaeology hands us a direct piece of proof that leaves no room for doubt. In the layers of that age, we find bone needles, thinner than a matchstick, with a neatly drilled eye at one end. The needles themselves, real ones. Do you understand what that means? A needle with an eye means thread. Thread means a seam. A straight, strong, deliberate seam in fur is the very difference that decides whether a person freezes in the night or makes it to morning. Behind that tiny bone needle stands a whole invisible labor. Someone took the hide. Someone scraped it, worked it soft, dried it. Someone cut it to the measure of a body and patiently stitched it with sinew. One small tool, and behind it, all the warmth of these people. The second front is fire. Here our man faces a problem we genuinely can't imagine, because for us it's impossible. In this steppe, there's almost no wood. Remember, a treeless expanse, nothing but low grass to the horizon. A fire has to be fed every day or it goes out. And when it goes out, so does the life of everyone around it. What do you burn when there's no firewood? They burned bone. The bones of big animals soaked in fat. And they burn well, slow, steady, throwing off a lot of heat. That completely changes what a hunt is worth. A mammoth carcass isn't just a mountain of meat, it's fuel too. A skeleton we'd throw away today was to them what an armful of firewood is to us. They also burned dry animal dung and that same tough grass. Every fire became a daily equation. What do we have today that will burn, and will it last until tomorrow? The third front is shelter, walls. Again, the same trouble. What do you build with when there's no wood for a frame, no branches for walls, and nothing around but a wind that never stops? They built with what there was plenty of, with the animals themselves. At the camps of that age's hunters, archaeologists find dwellings made of mammoth bone. Heavy tusks curved into a frame, big bones and skulls holding the walls, all of it covered over with hides. The result was a sturdy, low, warm structure that held off the wind and lasted more than one season. One of the most astonishing discoveries of this kind is a vast ring made from the bones of at least 60 mammoths, built right in our age, 25,000 years ago. We'll come back to that ring because there's a whole detective story hiding behind it. Now let's step back and look at all three fronts together, because they hold the main idea of this chapter. To sew a fitted suit, you need hands to work the hide and hands to do the stitching. To keep a fire without wood, someone has to haul bone and dung while others are busy. To raise a dwelling out of mammoth bone, well, one person can't even shift a mammoth's skull, let alone lift it into a wall. Not one of these three fronts can be won alone. Warmth beside the glacier isn't about one person's strength or their endurance. It's about how many hands are nearby and whether they work in time with each other. Out here, no one ever got warm by themselves. So, our man has won the first round. He has close-fitting fur on his body, a fire burning in a house of bone, the wind staying outside. You'd think he could breathe easy, but warmth is only half of staying alive. In a warm house, you still have to eat something, or all those walls just become the place where you wait to starve. And the main source of food in this steppe weighs more than a truck, carries tusks the height of a man, and has no intention whatsoever of dying so that our man's people can live to see spring. Let's stop for a moment, because by now a fair doubt should have crept in. I'm telling you about people who lived 25,000 years ago. They left no records, no names, no witnesses. So where does all this confidence come from? How do I know they sewed clothing, burned bone, shared food, and looked after their old? Isn't all of this made up? A pretty story stretched over a few scraps? It's a fair question. The answer to it is a fascinating story in its own right, because how we came to know this is every bit as gripping as life beside the ice itself. Let's come back to that ring of mammoth bone. There's a place in Eastern Europe, a kind of capital of Ice Age sites, called Kostenki, on the banks of the Don. The name itself comes from the word for bone, and for good reason. There's so much mammoth bone here that people noticed it and puzzled over it 300 years ago, long before the science of archaeology was even born. They couldn't understand where so many giant bones in the ground had come from, and they invented legends about elephants from ancient armies. Centuries passed before we learned to ask those bones the right questions. In 2020, a discovery was made there that takes your breath away. Archaeologists uncovered an enormous ring built from the bones of at least 60 mammoths, more than 12 meters across. It's exactly 25,000 years old, our time precisely, the same brutal age we've been talking about. 60 mammoths. Imagine the strength, the time, and the shared labor standing behind this one structure. Right away, a question rises that the bare bone won't answer on its own. What was it? A home? A shrine? A winter store? Scholars argue over it to this day, and that very uncertainty is more honest than any tidy story. This is where the real detective work begins, because an archaeologist isn't someone who simply digs up beautiful things. They're an investigator, reading the traces that life left behind, reconstructing an event from fragments that, to the untrained eye, are just rubbish in the dirt. Watch how it works. How do we know the bones in the hearth were burned on purpose and didn't just char by accident? Because at these sites we find bones charred in a particular way, stacked beside fires where there's almost no wood charcoal at all. So it was bone they burned because there was no wood. How do we know they sewed clothing? The needle with the eye, the one we already talked about, is the physical proof. How do we know they hunted from a distance? Because we find stone points lodged in animal bone at an angle and with a force only a throw could produce. Teeth worn down to the roots in human skulls tell us these people chewed tough food and softened hide with their mouths, that their mouths ached, that life was hard. All of it written on the very bones of someone who was once a living person. Then comes the subtlest part. Scientists have learned to read even what the eye can't see. They take a sample of soil from a layer of that age and count the grains of ancient pollen in it. Plenty of grass pollen and almost no tree pollen. There's your proof that the land around was treeless steppe, not forest. From the animal bones at a camp, they work out what was hunted and in what season. From children's teeth, the age at which children died. From the chemical makeup of the bones themselves, what a person ate across their whole life. Not a single written word, and still a whole story told if you know how to ask. So when I tell you these people sewed, burned bone, planned ahead and held together, this isn't my fantasy, and it isn't a pretty tale by the fire. Behind every one of those statements stands a needle, a point, a charred bone, a grain of pollen, a worn-down tooth. The past isn't silent. It just speaks a language you have to learn. That's exactly why we can turn back with such confidence into that steppe, to our man by the fire, and follow him onward to the great trial of his year, to the hunt for that very mountain of meat his people's winter depends on. Let's get a closer look at the one whose flesh their whole winter rides on. the woolly mammoth. Picture an animal as tall as a small room, covered in long reddish-brown hair, and under it a dense undercoat and a thick layer of fat. The tusks of a full-grown mammoth curved out several meters, the weight like several cars put together. One carcass like that meant nearly everything at once. Hundreds of kilos of meat, precious fat, hide enough for several dwellings, bone for fuel and for walls, tusk and sinew for tools. To take a mammoth was to close out all at once every problem we've just talked about: food, warmth and shelter alike. To fail to take one meant sliding slowly toward the line where you starve. Except the mammoth has no idea about any of these plans. Here's the misunderstanding worth clearing up right away. A human being physically cannot bring down a mountain like that alone. We have no fangs, no claws, no strength to handle an animal that size. If raw power were what settled it, the human wouldn't stand a chance out here. But we had three things the mammoth didn't, and they were what settled everything. Hands that can throw, a head that can plan ahead, and other people nearby. Start with the weapons. Spear points were made from stone and not crudely knocked off chunks. A maker would strike thin flakes from the flint so precisely that the edge came out sharp as a blade. A point like that punched through hide and reached deep. But to step right up to a mammoth and drive a spear in is close to suicide. One swing of the trunk or a tusk and the person is gone. Here, an invention appears that changed the rules of the game: the spear thrower. It's a simple but brilliant thing. A short lever of bone or wood with a hook at the end that the butt of the spear sits against. A hand holding one of these becomes, in effect, longer, and the spear flies off faster and travels farther than from a bare throw. Think of how much farther you can fling a tennis ball with one of those plastic dog ball launchers than with your bare hand. Same principle exactly. Now the hunter could strike his prey from a safe distance and stay alive. That same spear thrower hangs over the shoulder of our man by the fire. But even the best weapon isn't a hunt yet. The human's main weapon out in this steppe isn't the stone or the thrower. It's the plan. They hunted together and with cold calculation, turning the animal's own weight and the land itself against it. A giant mammoth is mighty on flat, open ground, but helpless wherever its mass turns against it. So the prey wasn't struck in open field. It was steered toward where it lost its advantage, to a ravine, a steep slope, a boggy sink, deep, loose snow where the heavy carcass floundered and stuck. Cut one animal off from the herd, steer it, wear it out, drive it into a trap of terrain, and then strike for certain, from a distance, several at once. This isn't frenzy, and it isn't brute force. It's knowledge. How the animal behaves, where it'll run when frightened, where the snow drifted deep this year, where the bog lies hidden. Knowledge gathered slowly over many years and handed down from the older ones. Here we have to be honest, because science demands honesty. We're used to picturing the heroic scene, brave hunters laying a mammoth low with spears day after day. The reality was probably more restrained. Yes, people hunted big game, there's evidence for that. But some of the bones their dwellings were built from, it seems, they didn't kill themselves. They gathered from animals that had died on their own, of old age, in a bog, in a flood, of disease. In a world where every calorie weighs against your life, it didn't matter whether you brought this carcass down yourself or found it ready. Only one thing mattered: whether it ended up with your people. So our man was both a skilled hunter and a sharp-eyed gatherer at once. Because out here, it isn't the proud who survive, but the ones who take everything the steppe gives. One more thing, the most important, the part so often lost behind the image of a thrown spear. A hunt isn't the instant someone lands a hit. It's the dozens of days leading up to it. Someone tracked for a long time where the herd would pass. Someone steered the animal one way while someone else waited in ambush. Someone knew in advance where to set the trap. An old one, who never ran after prey again, remembered how the herd behaved on this very spot last year. The great carcass didn't go to a single hero. It went to the whole band, working as one. Again, just as with warmth, it all comes down to the same thing. Out here, no one survived alone. But with a mountain of meat came a new trouble, an unexpected one, and dangerous for exactly that reason. Picture it. The band has taken a huge carcass. Joy, full bellies, relief. But eating all of it in a few days is impossible. It's more meat than these people can get through in a week. Ahead lie months when the herds will be gone, when blizzards will lock everyone inside, and not a single new hunt will happen. So a strange, almost insulting thing follows. You've taken more food than you can eat, and you're still in danger of starving. Because in a few days, fresh meat will start to rot and be lost. Now, the central question of winter is no longer how do we get it? It's a different one, harder. How do you make this mountain of food wait for spring along with you? Here's a paradox that looks strange at first. These people have taken a big carcass, there's plenty of food, and the danger of starving hasn't gone anywhere. It's simply been pushed back a few weeks. Because fresh meat doesn't live long. A few days and it begins to spoil. And spoiled meat isn't just wasted, it can poison and kill. Winter will run for months more. Months when there may be no new hunt at all. Which means the whole bet on survival now rests not on strength and not on a good aim, but on the ability to keep what's been taken. Here, for the first time in this whole story, our man's fiercest enemy unexpectedly becomes his ally. That ally is the cold itself. Think about what a refrigerator is. It's a box that holds an artificial freeze, so food won't spoil. Now remember where our man lives. The ground beneath him is frozen straight through and doesn't thaw even in summer below a certain depth. A pit dug into ground like that is a ready-made natural freezer where meat lies for weeks and doesn't rot. The very thing that tries to kill him every night saves his food from spoiling by day. This isn't a guess made for the sake of a nice line. The peoples of the north used permafrost ice pits like these until very recently, within the memory of our great-grandparents. It's reasonable to think the people of the glacial steppe, who lived inside that permafrost every day, noticed this property of it and put it to use. But to lean on the freeze alone is risky. A sudden thaw, a few warmer days, and the whole store turns to rot. So the meat wasn't only hidden in the cold, it was treated so it wouldn't spoil on its own. It was dried and smoked over the fire. A thin, dried strip of meat becomes light, keeps for months, and holds its nourishment, easy both to store and to carry. It's the same principle by which jerky is still made today. The human learned not just to hide food from time, but to change the food itself, so that time held no power over it. Now, the most precious thing of all, the thing that in that world was worth more than the meat itself: fat. To us today, in a world with too much food, the word fat sounds almost like an insult. Back there, it was the exact opposite. In a hard freeze, the body burns a staggering amount of energy just to keep from going cold. And it's fat that gives that energy most generously. It burns inside the body longest and hottest. Lean food doesn't save you in cold like that. You can stuff yourself with lean meat and still weaken. So fat was, quite literally, the fuel of life. It was never wasted. Bones full of fatty marrow were cracked open and boiled down, rendering out every drop. Nothing was thrown away in a world where every calorie stands between you and death. To throw away fat meant throwing away your own chances of seeing spring. I want you to stop here and look not at the meat, not at the pit, not at the fat, but at what's happening in our man's head while he does all of this. To dry meat, to hide it in permafrost, to render fat and lay in a store, you have to be thinking not about today's hunger. You have to picture a day that won't come for 3 months. You have to hold back the hand reaching to eat it all now, for the sake of a future self who doesn't exist yet and who may not even make it. A hungry predator can't do this. It eats while there's something to eat and gives no thought to tomorrow. But a human thinks. A human carries time in their head, remembers winters past, imagines ones to come, plans ahead, and sacrifices today for tomorrow. It's the very same ability you use when you set money aside for a rainy day, or lay out your week in advance. Here too, there's no gulf between you and him, only the same human knack for seeing past the present moment. So, the store is made. Let's take stock of where we stand on this day of the countdown. A house of mammoth bone holds off the wind. A fire burns inside it. Close-fitting fur is on the body. Meat lies in a frozen pit, strips dry alongside it. The precious fat is saved. It seems the worst is behind, and the rest of winter can just be waited out. And yet, before we let ourselves believe that, there is one more thing in this dwelling we haven't looked at, and it will tell us more about these people than every needle and spear we've talked about put together. Let me take you to a place. Not in our story exactly, but close enough to count. A little earlier in time, a little farther west, in a world that looks just like ours. The place is called Sungir. The ground there has held on to something for 34,000 years, and when archaeologists finally lifted it into the light, the whole picture of who we are shifted a little. In that ground lay 2 children, a boy of about 12, a girl of about 10, laid head to head, as if still in conversation. Around them, on them, over them, beads. Beads of ivory carved from the tusks of mammoths. Tiny, polished, drilled through with a hole no thicker than a hair. Not a handful, not 100, More than 10,000. 10,000 beads on 2 children. Sit with that number for a second, because the number is the whole story. Scientists tried to work out how long it takes to make a single bead like that. To cut the ivory, to grind it round, to drill the hole with a stone tool, to polish it. The answer they got was roughly 45 minutes for one bead, working steadily by someone who knows what they're doing. Now multiply 10,000 beads. At 45 minutes each, that is somewhere around 7,500 hours of work. If a single adult sat down and did nothing else from morning to night, it would take that person years. In the real world, it was many hands, working in shifts across many winters for these 2 children alone. Here's the part that catches in the throat. Both of these children had something wrong with them. The boy's bones show a developmental problem. The girl's, the same kind of weakness. By the cold arithmetic we like to imagine our ancestors lived by, the strongest survive, the weakest are left behind. These 2 should have been the first to fall off the back of the sled. They were not the future hunters. They were not the ones who would carry the line forward. The people around them spent years of their time on them anyway. Think about what that actually means. In a world where every calorie counted against your life, where the difference between living and dying was one good seam in a fur coat, these people took their rarest, most precious resource, not meat, not fat, not fuel, but the hours of adult human hands, and laid them down on 2 children who would not pay them back. Hours that could have been spent sewing for the strong, or shaping new points, or preparing more food. Hours that were instead spent making something beautiful for someone fragile. When those children died, too young, too soon, the people around them did not let them go quietly. They dressed them in everything they had made. They laid them head to head. They buried them with care. This is not what an animal does. No animal on this planet does this. A pack of wolves does not bury its weakest with honor. A herd of mammoths does not spend years grinding ivory for a calf that won't grow. There is one creature on the whole of this earth that takes its scarcest resource and spends it on the ones who can give nothing back. And that creature is sitting around our fire right now, 25,000 years ago, wearing fur its mother stitched, and warming children its grandmother is watching over. We have to be honest about something here, because it's easy to read this scene wrong. It would be a mistake to picture our ancestors as gentle saints who never let anyone go hungry. Life beside the ice was hard, and not every child made it through, and not every choice was kind. But what these beads tell us is that within the circle of hours, the human being had already crossed a line no other creature has crossed before or since. The line where a life is worth something not because it is useful, but because it is yours. 10,000 beads on 2 children who couldn't run with the herds, carved by hands that had every reason to spend that time on themselves. That is not survival. That is something else. Something we don't quite have a clean word for, because we've been doing it for so long, we've stopped noticing we're doing it. Now look around our dwelling once more. The man with the scar through his eyebrow. The old woman who remembers 40 winters. the mother stitching by the small flame. The two children pressed against her side for warmth. One of them may be limping a little, the other a little too quiet, a little too thin. Do you see now what our man sees when he looks at the faces around the fire? He doesn't see mouths to feed. He doesn't see weak links and strong ones. He sees people, every one of them worth the winter, every one of them worth the 10,000 beads they have not yet had time to carve. It is exactly because he sees them this way, every one of them his own, that the next danger of winter will cut so deep when it comes. Because it's exactly here, the moment hunger and cold have finally drawn back, that a threat begins to press on the dwelling that no spear, no fire, and no store of food can beat. The line is still weeks away. Light comes for only a few hours a day. The rest is darkness. Blizzards seal a dozen people inside one cramped dwelling for a long time, day after day, the same faces close by, nowhere to step out to. Now the greatest danger is no longer the steppe outside. It's the people themselves, inside. Whether they can keep from tearing at each other, from quarreling, from falling apart, when the only thing left to do is wait and endure one another. The longest part of winter isn't the hunting and it isn't the freeze. It's the waiting. Picture a dozen people sealed in by blizzard inside one low dwelling. Light for a few hours a day, the rest of it thick darkness. Almost nowhere to go and almost nothing to go to. The same faces close by, day after day, week after week. Hunger and cold have drawn back, but in their place comes another trial, finer and more treacherous. People have to endure one another in the cramped dark, in their exhaustion, and not break. A community the steppe can't kill can still kill itself from within. A quarrel, a grudge, a fight over a scrap, a split into us and them. And just like that, some are left with no protection, no shared fire, no shared hunt. Alone, as we already know, no one out here survived. So there had to be something that held these people together, even when everything was pushing them apart. An invisible glue. It was no smaller an invention than the needle or the spear. It just can't be dug out of the ground with a shovel. It was made of three things. The first glue is fairness in food. Among hunters, the catch didn't belong to whoever brought it down. It was shared among everyone. That might seem strange. Why should the best hunter have to feed those who brought back nothing today? Behind it stands a cold and very clever calculation for survival. Today, luck was with you. You're fed and you feed everyone. Tomorrow, you'll come back empty-handed, or go down with an injury, or fall ill, and then they'll feed you. Hunting is a fickle business. One day plenty, the next nothing. And so it goes for everyone. When all of them share, that fickleness is spread across everyone, and no one dies by chance over a single unlucky day. Shared food is the oldest insurance on earth. Each feeds all, so that all might one day feed each. The second clue is that around this fire there were no spare people. The strong hunted. But survival didn't rest on them alone. Someone scraped the hides and sewed that life-saving clothing. Someone kept the fire. Someone hauled water and snow to melt. Someone watched the small children while the others were out in the steppe. Every pair of hands had its place. Now, about the ones we're used to writing off, the old. By the fire in our dwelling sits an elderly woman. By the measure of that world, she has lived a very long life. She's perhaps 50, and that's a real achievement where few reached grey hair at all. She won't run after a herd anymore, won't bend a bow. You'd think, what use to anyone is someone who doesn't bring in food, only eats it? But she has something no young hunter has, and it's worth more than any meat. Memory. Think about it. In that world, there is no writing. No books, no records, no way to keep knowledge anywhere but inside a living human head. Knowledge is survival itself. Where the good river crossing was last year, what the harshest winter in the last 40 years was like, and how they came through it then. Which ravine makes it easier to drive a herd into a trap? Which berry heals and which one kills? Where it gets dangerous to go? None of it is written anywhere. It lives only inside this old woman's head. She is the living library of her people. When she tells the young ones through the long, dark evenings, she isn't just passing time with chatter. She's handing down the very thing without which the next generation won't live to grey hair of its own. To lose her was to burn down a library no one could ever rebuild. So she was kept safe, not out of pity, out of need. The third glue is the strangest and maybe the most important. It's a meaning you can't eat. These people, pinned between the freeze and hunger at the very edge of survival, did things that at first glance had no practical use at all. They strung beads of bone and shell to wear. They carved little figures from tusk and stone. They marked patterns into things. They buried their dead not just anyhow, but with ornaments, with rite, with care. What use is that to someone fighting for life every day? A bead won't feed you and won't warm you. But it was exactly these seemingly useless things that turned a crowd of freezing people into a community. A shared rite, a shared image, a shared story told by the fire, a shared song in the dark. That's what gave people the sense of we, the thing that makes holding together and enduring one another worth doing at all. An animal fighting to survive doesn't make art. A human makes art even at the edge of death, because surviving in body isn't enough for us. We need something to survive for. That what for turned out to be as much a condition of survival as the meat in the frozen pit. So these people have everything they need: warmth, food in store, the invisible glue that holds them together, fairness, the worth of every one of them, a shared meaning. They did everything right, everything a human of that world could possibly do to survive. Even so, it might not have been enough. The countdown has reached its darkest mark. Ahead lies the very night the whole count from 120 was building toward. The longest, coldest, hungriest stretch of winter, its very floor. The line where every right decision, all the skill and all the unity come face to face with a nature that does not care how well you prepared. To reach it, we have only a few steps left to take. Here it is, that night, the longest night of the coldest stretch of winter, the floor of the year. The day's light barely flickered for a few hours and went out. And now, darkness will hold for nearly a full day. The freeze grips the steppe so hard the ground itself cracks. The wind never stops. In the house of Mammoth bone, a fire burns, smaller than they'd like, because fuel is counted too. Around it, our people. The same man with the scar through his eyebrow. The old woman who remembers 40 winters like this one. Children pressed against the adults for warmth. The store in the frozen pit shrinks slowly, but without pause. This is the line the whole count from 120 was for. The point where everything prepared meets a nature indifferent to your preparation. Here we have to say it plainly, with no heroic gloss. Not everyone survived this line. The weakest, the oldest, the smallest, the ones unlucky with a wound or an illness. Some of these people didn't come through this night. That was the reality, and the people of that world knew it by sight. But the rest held on, and held on for exactly the reason we've been talking about. Because they sewed the clothing, raised the dwelling, stored the fat, shared the food, kept their living memory and their shared meaning. Each of those choices alone didn't save anyone, but all of them together gave the one thing you could have out here: a chance. Now, at the very floor, we can finally answer the question we set aside at the start, maybe the most important one of all. If it was like this, freeze, hunger, darkness, the death of the weakest, then why didn't they leave? It was warmer to the south, easier. Why did the human stubbornly cling to the edge of the ice instead of falling back to where life wouldn't cost so much? The answer comes in two parts, and both say a great deal about who we are. The first part is practical. The steppe beside the glacier was cruel, but it was rich. This is exactly where those huge herds grazed: mammoths, horses, reindeer, bison. Here was food, hide, bone, fuel, everything life rested on. The cold steppe fed whoever knew how to take from it. To go south meant leaving those herds for unknown lands, where everything would have to be learned from scratch, and where other people might already be waiting for you. People clung to the edge of the ice, not in spite of that richness, but precisely because of it. They lived where the food was. There's a second part, and it matters more. Not everyone did stay. When the cold pressed hardest, people really did fall back. Archaeologists see it clearly. At the peak of the ice, vast stretches of northern Europe emptied out, and the population contracted into a few warm southern pockets. They're called refugia, refuges. There, in the south of Europe, in sheltered valleys, people withdrew and waited out the worst, like embers smouldering under ash, waiting for the moment they could flare up again. The instant the ice drew back a little and it warmed, they returned north, following the herds. So the human was neither a stubborn suicide dying at the ice on principle, nor a coward fleeing for good. They did both, held on while they could, and fell back when they had to, in order to survive and return. It was exactly this flexibility, this capacity to both endure and withdraw, and then come back again, that carried our kind through the coldest stretch in 100,000 years. We survived the ice not because we were the strongest, but because we were the cleverest, and because we held together. Now the most important thing. The thing this whole conversation was for. Because all of this could have stayed just an interesting story about long-dead people in a long-vanished world. But it isn't their story. It's yours. Remember where we began. I promised to show you how much of what was invented back then you're still carrying inside you. Here it is. Your winter coat works on the same principle of layers and still air that these people built into fur 25,000 years ago. Your refrigerator is their permafrost pit, the very same idea of keeping food with cold. When you set money aside for a rainy day or plan the week ahead, you're using the same ability to carry time in your head that they used drying meat for their future selves. When you share your last with someone close, not counting who owes whom, the same oldest instinct for fairness is speaking in you that held them together through the dark evenings. When you listen to an old person telling you about times long past, you're doing exactly what the children did beside that woman, drawing knowledge from a living library. When you decorate your home, sing a song, or keep a photograph of those who are gone, you're repeating their strangest invention of all, the need not just to live, but to live for something. These people left us no names, no inscriptions, no tombs. They left us something greater. They left us themselves, in how we keep warm, how we eat, how we love, how we remember, and what we hold together for. Every one of us today is a descendant of those who, on that longest night, did not give up, who stitched one more seam, fed one more bone to the fire, shared the last scrap, and waited for morning. Because it was right there, at the edge of that ice, in the freeze and the dark and the hunger, that something was assembled, drop by drop. The thing we so casually call by one short word today: our humanity. When that night's line is finally crossed, and the sky in the east grows pale a little earlier than it did yesterday, our man with the scar through his eyebrow steps out of the dwelling, looks at that thin dawn, and understands what we've come to understand alongside him over this year. The worst is behind. The herds are coming back. Spring is beginning. With it, everything begins again.